right. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Angela Fobbs and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I currently live in Germany. I want to introduce our team today. First, I want to introduce Karen Lee. She was born in Galion, had her young adulthood in Mansfield, and also Ohio State University, and later worked in Columbus before moving to Greece. She's been all over Ohio. Next, we have Nikki Vondervell, originally from Xenia, Kenton Barnes, originally from Toledo, Jeff Simmons, born in Cleveland and grew up in Columbus, and Christine Anderson from Chagrin Falls, and from Euclid, which is a suburb of Cleveland. So we are the Ohio team, and we thank you for being here. When we planned our agenda for this event, we thought the main focus would be on redistricting. Then DeWine armed the teachers. LGBTQ rights continue to be under attack with the House bill to inspect genitalia. And of course, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Ohio responded by making the heartbeat bill, which means no abortions when a fetal heartbeat is detected at 6 weeks, and no exceptions for rape or incest, rather, not instinct. We discussed as a team whether we should proceed and with today of our theme of election integrity, because it underlines all the issues facing Ohioans today, emphasizes the great need we have for honorable and humane justices in the Ohio Supreme Court. And of course, there'll be time for Q&A, and we want to encourage you to write your questions for your speakers down in the chat at the designated time. Republicans are no longer hiding their intentions or their feelings about what they want the US to be. And as we heard during last month's event, registration and requests for ballots have been down among Democrats in Ohio, as well as those of us living abroad. So please make sure that you go ahead and request your absentee ballot today at votefromabroad.org. It's really simple, and it's really important that everyone votes. Now I'd like to hand it over to our International Vice Chair and Akron native, Art Shinkler.
Art? Thanks very much, Angela. I live in Serbia, and I would note that that region has been the source of a number of Ohio politicians over the years. Unfortunately, most of them Republican, but a few Democrats. So I feel a closeness here and there, as well as being from Akron originally. I think, the decisions of the US Supreme Court, plus the Wisconsin Supreme Court recently, which basically dictated that there would be no more drop boxes in the election this year, and basically said that Trump or that Joe Biden did not win the election in Wisconsin in 2020. So it basically, from a purely partisan basis, repeated the lies of Trump and his friends. So I think it emphasizes the importance of courts, particularly the Supreme Court, at both the state and the national level. And that's why it's so important for people to vote from Ohio and around the country. I would also point out that I think in Ohio, we have a real chance to pick up a Senate seat. I think Tim Ryan is running ahead of J.D. Vance. And I'm hoping that Congressman Ryan will help write the hillbilly political eulogy, at least in the election in November. Yeah, I got that little joke in. And Nan Whaley has a chance to defeat Governor DeWine, who I think, given the subject of this call and our participants in this call, should note that his son, Patrick, is on the Supreme Court now and is running for re-election against one of our participants, Judge Zayas, who I would also give a shout out to. Like her, my father also went to City College of New York and then moved to Ohio. So there's a lot going for that. And finally, on a somewhat more somber note, I would note as an Akron native, the killing of Jalen Walker, a young African-American who was shot 60 times by the police and then handcuffed, all in respect of a traffic violation. And I think his killing is a tragedy, but it also emphasizes the importance of justice and the importance of justice at all levels, from top to bottom. And with that, I will turn it, I think, over to Jeff to introduce our participants, or at least some of our participants today. Thanks very much. Thank you. Get out and vote. Sure.
That's right. Thank you, Art. Before we get on with our first pair of speakers, we had a couple of reminders. If you keep your eye on the chat box while we're watching, we'll be adding some links and information there that will be relevant to some of the subjects that we're talking about. And we're going to keep a close eye on the time to keep on schedule, because experience has shown that that's important in a Zoom call. The timekeeper will be Nikki, and so she might be holding up some cards to the time, and don't be surprised if she bursts in with a polite and non-confrontational reminder. All right, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first two speakers. We have David Pepper, back by popular demand. He's the former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, and he's the author of 3 novels and a nonfiction work called Laboratories of Autocracy during this past year. All 4 of those books deals with the ways in which elections can be tampered with, and thus with tampering with democracy itself. One of the problems in history was the situation in Cuyahoga County in 2004. That's the year that John Kerry was running. And that situation was addressed and cleaned up by the Ohio Secretary of State that time, who's Jennifer Brunner, who's with us today. Justice Brunner is now Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, and she is the Democratic Party's candidate for Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. And for a bit of full disclosure, when we were planning our meeting today, I asked if I could introduce Justice Brunner, because I've been a fan for some time, and that goes back to her term as Ohio Secretary of State and everything that went on back then. Those are issues that are relevant to the subjects that we're talking about today. So I'd like to begin with David. Could you begin with a look back at some of that history and its relevance in this year's elections?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you again. I really appreciate being back with you all. And I see we have Justice candidates Jamison and Zayas on as well, and Justice Brunner. And I think you all may know this, although I learned this only as the ODP chair. One of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of Democrats Abroad is because it's one of the greatest untapped set of voters that we have as a Democratic Party. Millions of voters live overseas. And the reason it's so great that you guys are on this call, the voting percentage of those voters is very low. And we know actually a strong majority of those voters are Democrats. So right now, when I worked with Democrats Abroad as chair, I think about the size of Toledo is the population that lives overseas from Ohio. And again, if we do a good job working with Democrats Abroad, think about the difference between getting 10% of Toledo out and 60%. That's why Democrats Abroad matters so much here in Ohio and all across the country. And we know, and I'm just bragging for Democrats Abroad, to Ohioans here who live here, we know that in these close races, some of them, Democrats Abroad, were literally the difference in the margin of victory in some of these close states. So one thing, I'm thrilled that we have these 3 candidates on. They're so important to our prospects in November. But I just I'm always pitching Democrats Abroad because there's not that much low-hanging fruit left in politics. Finding more and more people abroad to vote back at home and helping them through it is a really, really important thing. So I just want to talk real quick, and Justice Brunner knows this because of her time as Secretary of State, but I think it's something that I never appreciated until I got to know these guys well. So I want to start talking about Justice Brunner's incredible work as Secretary of State and then transition into the enormous opportunity in these Supreme Court races. But Justice Brunner, there was a really, there's a lot of interest in this group about obviously voter protection, voting rights, some of the efforts at suppressing the vote, as well as incompetence that often suppresses the vote. So, you know, we know that I'll never forget standing outside a street polling site in 2004, and I was hearing by mid-afternoon that Kerry was going to win in Ohio. I don't know if anyone else heard that. And over the course of the coming days, what I had heard, the good news, turned into this nightmare of, you know, Kenyan students out till 5 a.m. in line trying to vote, other really problematic places. And then Justice Brunner and I first met when she was running for Secretary of State in 2006, and she got to work cleaning up a lot of what became this infamous election 2004 that was overseen by someone who still today is always causing trouble, Ken Blackwell. So Justice Brunner, before we talk about your race now, do you want to talk a little about what you sort of inherited when you became Secretary of State and the kind of things you had to do to clean things up? And you all should know, for her work as Secretary of State, Justice Brunner won one of the Kennedy Profiles of Courage. She did such a great job cleaning up what had been such a mess. So Justice Brunner, since that's one of the questions they had, do you want to talk to us about that before we transition into your current election?
Oh, sure, David. And I just, as a little preface, I want you to know that 2 years after I left the Secretary of State's office, I started doing USAID work on rule of law. So I did 4 different engagements in Serbia. Just thought I'd throw that in for you folks out there. And Egypt and Sri Lanka and Kazakhstan after that. But appreciate what you do and appreciate where you are. You know, I can remember being a trial judge in 2004, contemplating running for Secretary of State and actually going just as a citizen to some of the hearings about the problems in the 2004 election. And I was actually shocked. I resigned from the bench because I can't run for a non-judicial office while I'm still a judge. So I could run for Secretary of State. Was lucky I had my family support to do that. And then in the process, I would, of the election, I would hear from so many election activists, and I kept thinking, these people like sprung up out of cornfields. Just like what do they do? But they were so passionate about the problems that they observed in the different parts of the state. And frankly, when I took over from Ken Blackwell, most of what would have been transition documents for me were shredded. Fortunately, a transition manual that had been shredded was had been mentioned to me, and then my communications director actually did a radio interview saying that we never received the manual. And then one of his employees, who had been the designer for the manual, came into his room, backed herself up against the door and said, I want you to know I have a copy of the transition manual. And so we were able to actually kind of pick up the pieces from there. But immediately after I was in that position, it was like the first elections conference, which was the 3rd week in January. 2 top elections workers in the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections had been indicted and then finally convicted of election fraud on a recount that was asked for by the Green Party. So I remember saying to 2 of the Board of Elections members in Cuyahoga County, I think you should probably put them on administrative leave. Once they were sentenced for felony 4s, which was up to 18 months in prison, and the judge gave them each 18 months in prison, I remember sitting in my office thinking, somebody needs to do something about this. And I said to myself, that would be you. So fortunately, my Assistant Secretary of State at the time had worked for Stephanie Tubbs Jones, who was very strong on voting integrity. And I remember walking into his office, and he was from Cuyahoga County, thinking he was going to tell me I was crazy. I said, I think we need to fire the whole board. And his eyes lit up and he said, oh yeah. And we went through the process. Being female, I thought, I'll be polite. I'll ask the board if they would please resign, and then I'll tell them, if you don't resign, then I'll make sure that you do. And so we managed to, after some protracted time, especially litigation involving the chair of the Ohio Republican Party, who sat on the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections because he had a house on the lake in Cuyahoga County, we did secure all of their resignations, went through a robust process of getting qualified folks on the board. In fact, I think we put 4 attorneys on the board when we did that. And Then I put the board on administrative oversight, worked closely with their director, and that board actually became the model for the rest of the state. And when any boards of elections of the 88 counties said, "Oh, we can't possibly do what you're asking us to do," I would just simply point to Cuyahoga County and say, "Well, they have 1 million voters. They're doing it. You need to do this." That process was after Ken Blackwell involved putting staff out there to provide IT support and help to help all the boards of elections actually have websites that voters could access. And knowing we were bringing new voters into the process, while we cleaned up the database to eliminate duplicates, we actually would put a map of the state of Ohio on the website, and any new voter could click on their county and see a video of how the voting machines worked in their area. Meanwhile, the flip side of it was that there was a lot of garbage out there about voter fraud, which and there was just it was infinitesimal. It was small. You could count on the fingers of one hand the number of actual situations, which makes what's going on right now pretty disturbing. So David, I'll let you pick up from there.
Great, thanks. I knew Justice Brunner when she was running and loved campaigning with her. I was running myself for county commission, but only since I became chair did I appreciate just what she inherited and had to do in that job. So Jeff, like you, I've been a big fan of hers for a very long time. Can I ask one question, by the way, Justice Brunner? You brought this up before. This is about the Secretary of State's office. You were the one who figured out how to have Ohio's early votes counted first, right? That was something you did, right?
Yes. Yes, the boards of elections essentially came to my staff and said, "Look, the counting machines, the servers have two functions. They scan and they tabulate. Is there some way?" And 2005, the law changed in Ohio to allow no-fault absentee voting, meaning anyone could vote absentee without any excuse. Previously, you had to have an excuse. And of course, going into the 2008 election with Barack Obama and the extreme community organizing approach that was taken by that campaign, this was like hand in glove. It was a perfect fit. So we knew the number of absentee ballots would be up. We also knew that there was this, I won't get into Golden Week too much, but there was an overlap between the close of voter registration and the beginning of early voting. So when it was a matter of convenience for the boards of elections, so that any absentee ballots that were received before the election, they could go ahead and have scanned so that at 7:30 p.m. when people want instantaneous results, they could at least see the results of the absentee ballots that had come in before the election. And I think that helped the boards of elections greatly in the process.
Yeah, and the reason I bring this up for everyone else, and I could be a little more political than Justice Brunner, you watch Trump go on and on about early vote and the days that follow. Justice Brunner showed that any one of these states with early vote could also count it early. The idea that it's drawn out in Pennsylvania and these other states, it's because those legislatures actually just chose to do that. And so they've added a whole lot of drama to the early vote process that Justice Brunner, just by being a good manager, avoided. And Democrats in some of these states like Pennsylvania have asked to do the same thing. And ironically, it's the Republicans that say, "Oh, no, we don't want to do it." And that's what drags out the voting in these other states. And Justice Brunner showed it can be done. Little editorial comment from me there. So let me transition to the current race. And I am so glad you guys are having this. I honestly think, and I think Tim Ryan can win. I think the last couple of weeks have made it actually even better for him to win. He had a poll the other day. He's up 2 points. I think Governor DeWine, although in a better position than J.D. Vance, I think he is really hurt by these recent decisions. He'll have terrible answers. He's signed some terrible laws. But all that being said, and the candidates here know I believe this, there's nothing long-term that matters more for Ohio's democracy than the three races we're going to talk about today. Nothing. You have seen for the last 2 years an autocratic legislature essentially waiting for Maureen O'Connor to be gone so they can get a court that will rubber stamp whatever they want. And the best way to stop that horrific plan, which is lawless, is to stymie it by electing the 3 candidates today. And one of the worst prospects in front of us would be Justice Brunner, with her wonderful background, as she runs for Chief Justice, would be if Ohio allowed her opponent to replace Maureen O'Connor. Disaster. I don't want to go through all the details, but Justice Kennedy is not someone that we want as the Chief Justice. It's such a, and you all know this, especially lawyers, the Chief Justice of the state of Ohio is one of the 3 figureheads of the state. If I think of Maureen O'Connor and her predecessor, Tom Moyer, every bit as much as I think about a governor or a senator. They are a bigger presence, a bigger voice, a real leader, and also have incredibly important powers as Chief Justice beyond just casting votes 1 out of 7. So the opportunity we have through Justice Brunner's run is an enormous one, to have her be the leader of the criminal justice system in the state of Ohio. And then by winning the other 2 races, we take a court where so many decisions are going to end up that the risk is it goes 4-3 with Pat DeWine and Justice Kennedy and Justice Fischer in charge, to one where it's these 3 women, 2 other Democratic endorsed candidates. It is night and day. And the decisions that will come before them are literally a generation of impact. So Justice Brunner, do you want to talk a little about your race and the role that you see the Chief Justice playing in particular, and the sort of the opportunity you think if you're able to win, and the risk if your opponent has a chance there?
Sure. The role of the Chief Justice under the state constitution is the superintendent of all the courts in the state, according to the rules of superintendents. So those rules of superintendents are actually adopted and approved by the justices of the Supreme Court by a majority. So if for instance, on things like making sure we're not creating debtor prisons with excessive bail, a change to one of the criminal rules to ensure that in determining once someone's permitted to have bail, that in determining the amount, that we're not aggrandizing the amount based upon the perceived public perception about it, and we're people who, if they can safely be out of jail pending trial since they're innocent before proved guilty, that they actually can be there, work, and we're sure that they're going to show up until their trial. So that the money involved has to do with what is going to ensure that they come back to trial. So that rule went into effect last year, and that was one where Chief Justice O'Connor needed my vote. She's Republican, I'm Democrat, to ensure that that passed. And so that's sort of the role of the chief with these rules and with how they work for the rest of the state. But the chief also appoints the judges on the Court of Claims, and those judges are judges who decide cases that are filed against the state of Ohio for money damages. If there is a judge who needs to recuse in a particular case or refuses to recuse in a particular case, the chief, number 1, will decide whether they have to recuse, and number 2, appoint whoever would be replacing them in that particular matter. But even more important than that is the vision of the chief for where the direction of the courts need to go. The chief is empowered to create task forces, move things in a direction, things that I would like to do. For instance, I want to create a commission on fairness and equality in Ohio's courts and legal system, because we had over 20 years ago a report on the Commission on Racial Fairness that came up with suggestions like what's just being done in the last 2 years, which is the statewide criminal sentencing database. So, and that's for transparency, for the ability to understand and explain differences in similar types of sentencing with people of similar criminal law backgrounds. And it could be within a county, it could be from different parts of the state, but we need to be able to know at any particular time in Ohio how many people we have on probation. That's also called community control. How many people overall are sentenced for this particular type of crime, and we don't have that data currently available. And when someone like the National Center for State Courts looks at Ohio, they have to go county by county by county in 88 counties. And look, Ohio is better than that. We can do much better. So the chief the last point about that, David, is that the chief is in a leadership role, and I believe that the chief is in a position to inspire the other judges of the state to understand that they are first public servants, second judges. They're public servants who happen to be judges, and that the role of the court in our communities can be within our lane, but fully occupying our lane so that we're actually helping people understand what we do, build their confidence, which makes us do our jobs better, and provide service to our communities. Things like specialized dockets and things I've mentioned, like the database, are just the beginning.
Thank you. Talk, if you can, and I'm not trying to invite you to be negative, but talk about, you mentioned this criminal database and other things. Has Justice Kennedy talked about her view on those things? I know there's some hostility to it from some corners. It's just an
Yes, and I'm
example
just
of
going
it.
to talk factually.
Yeah.
I'm just going to talk factually. Justice Kennedy is not in favor of the database, and she seems to think there are HIPAA concerns with it. I've actually spent time with the committee that's working on it. There are 61 different judges piloting a uniform sentencing entry that's electronic. Working with the University of Cincinnati. She's questioned the origins of how it started, about who's going to own the database, a legitimate question, but we're working with the state university. She actually made a public records request about information from the Supreme Court. Overall, she once said in an oral argument that courts are creatures of the legislature, and nothing could be further from the truth. Understanding that the Ohio Constitution does say that the legislature sets the jurisdiction of the lower courts, but not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's jurisdiction comes directly from the state constitution, and so the view is a more narrow, restrictive view. For instance, all the major Ohio business groups, associations, have endorsed the three opponents to the three of us running for the court today. And the thrust of that comment in talking about why they endorse these candidates is that it creates predictability. And it's frustrating for me to think that, okay, if predictability is important on the conservative side, why did the US Supreme Court upend in decision after decision this month things like Roe v. Wade and gun safety and the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency? And you'll hear conservatives talk about textualism and originalism. And, I honestly didn't know what those things meant, because I just tried to be fair and use the plain language when I could. And then you interpret after the plain language doesn't seem to work. And that's what our law says anyways. And I looked it up, and I realized that these concepts were started by a law student conference at Yale University around 1981, when this group of folks thought that there weren't enough conservatives in the legal field. And so what I found is that textualism and originalism, and some of these monikers that they put, like predictability, they just mean whatever people say they mean who want to use them to reach the result that they want. And when conservatives accuse other folks of legislating from the bench, what they're really saying is you're just trying to control the outcome of what you want here. But when I was asked in 2020 about being an activist judge, I said the only activist judges I know call themselves conservative. So there we have it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say bigger picture, and I'll just ask you to respond to this. I think we have the last year, and I know there's some things you can't comment on because of it's still active, but I'll just be very general. I think we are on the verge of and really we're in this space now of a rule of law crisis in Ohio. We have a legislature that has literally said repeatedly, for those who haven't paid close attention, they have simply ignored court ruling after court ruling after court ruling. And this election, I think, is very much about, do we want justices who actually stand separate from a legislature that is happy to defy court orders? Or do we want a Supreme Court of Ohio that to this point in a bipartisan way has said, no, actually, we're an independent body. And as I read the three dissenters in some of these cases, these gerrymandering ones, I mean, they basically have said the legislature, as you just described, does what it wants. So I think we have and I think I speak for a lot of Ohioans really worried about what is the future of the rule of law in the state of Ohio with a legislature that just defies the will of the people, and 3 justices who want to be a majority who simply say that's fine. And Justice Brunner, it kind of reminds me of the work I'm sure you did when you were overseas. Rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. So can you talk about sort of the rule of law and the state of the rule of law in Ohio right now, and how this election might impact that? Because I think it's one of the big questions in the background is what do we do with a frayed rule of law right now as we see it in Ohio?
I think we simply have to be helping people understand that we're at a tipping point in Ohio. And when I worked in Serbia, at the time there was 25% unemployment. It's really hard to imagine. A person who was an air traffic controller also was doing massage therapy on the side. A reporter, as I was working with the Anti-Corruption Agency, and if you can even imagine, in the United States, we wouldn't be used to there being an anti-corruption agency. But and that is because when I was working with the Anti-Corruption Agency, anyways, we were unfolding a new method of campaign finance monitoring, and I think we were in Zlatibor, and I was explaining it through interpreters to these media folks, and finally one of the reporters came up to me on an aside and said, he ended up having to pay 3,000 euro to the principal of the public school in order for his wife to get a teaching position. And he said, I had to feed my family, but I figured that at least as a reporter, I could expose it. And so when you see things like that, and I would tell them about, for instance, what happened in Cuyahoga County, and then some of the other things that happened in Cuyahoga County involving some of the office holders. And they said to me, "You're as bad as we are." I said, "Oh, but we prosecute." And it time and time again, to quell corruption, to root out corruption, it takes a strong and healthy judiciary for that to happen. Because if people have faith that there is some accountability someplace, and generally that accountability is found in prosecution of corruption and in the judiciary handling it fairly, then people start to trust the system. For instance, when I was working with the misdemeanor judges on their retention period after the then change in the Constitution for the judiciary, I suggested to them that perhaps we would have some kind of that and the Anti-Corruption Agency, but I suggested some kind of a hotline where people could call about problems. And being a former non-aligned communist country, they were not really keen on that because one party rule usually means people are telling on each other anyways. But these countries, whether it's Egypt or whether it's Serbia, who are struggling to make their democracy stronger, it starts with the judiciary. Interestingly, in Egypt, with the election observation I did there, judges actually are the presiding judges of all the precincts where people vote. So every precinct you walk into where you're doing the observation, the first person you talk to is an actual judge in the Arab Republic of Egypt. So I cannot. I mean, it's not out of self-interest. I mean, I wanted to go back to the judiciary when I had the chance in 2014 because I really feel that that's where we start to clean up the problems.
Yeah, and I think that, and just so everyone listening knows, I mean, there's a real sense of lack of accountability right now with this legislature. The rule of law is in question, and the outcome of these 3 races is actually, to me, just in my opinion, is going to determine if we actually have a rule of law versus a legislature that just simply doesn't care often what courts say. It's that important. This is something I'll just put out there for Justice Brunner and the other 2 justices. I know going to questions. I want to have everyone think about what is the even more robust role that Supreme Courts of states are going to play now the federal Supreme Court is striking down federal rights. I mean, we're already seeing cases around post-Roe, abortion in states. This could happen in other areas where the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't touch things like voting rights. Justice Brunner, real quick, I know we're against the time window. As we go into Q&A, talk about the bigger role that you see state Supreme Courts playing in a lot of cases that used to be federal cases that no longer will be because of the work of the conservative Supreme Court. And then I'll stop talking.
Well, our definition in Ohio of what's in our Constitution for things like equal protection is actually broader than what's in the United States Constitution. So there will be this different definition of constitutional rights that formally, well, I don't want to say formally yet, but it looks to me like the U.S. Supreme Court is starting to erode those 14th Amendment substantive rights, substantive due process. And if that's the case, and it throws those to the states, again, on the theory that there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that protects the right to have an abortion, then you're going to see different definitions of what substantive due process looks like from state to state to state. And so the state Supreme Courts are going to be vitally important in that.
All right, well, thank you, David and Justice Brunner. We have a few minutes planned for Q&A, and the way that we do this, Angela has already said something in the chat. If you have a question, you can type up * hand up in the chat. The 2 stars make it easy to see. Angela will be watching the box and keeping track of the queue and announcing who's next. And since it usually takes a little while for someone to have a question to ask, we already have Kenton is ready with a question. So unless someone has already put themselves in the chat, Kenton, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Okay. I have a question. Even though the USA was founded as a secular country with a strict separation of church and state, it seems as if Judeo-Christian views have seeped their way into not only legislation, but also judicial decisions. In light of the recent SCOTUS decision regarding abortion rights, can we expect more decisions that are based on religious beliefs and less on jurisprudence?
And that question is for?
Chief Justice Brunner.
Okay, great. Hard to tell. I for one, that's not the way my brain works. And not that I'm not a spiritual person, but I just know that, if I'm going to actually be answering to my creator or whoever it is out there, I better be following the law, because that's the oath that I took. I didn't take an oath to follow, some other canon law or Sharia law or whatever, or some other kind of biblical law. I took the oath to follow the law. And if you think about it from a societal standpoint, it is the legislature, through legislation, that essentially reflects the morals of society. And so when judges come in, they need to simply, they simply need to have a blank tablet in front of them, so that they're working within that framework of what that morality is as set by the legislature. I will say that when it comes to case law, the case law is sort of the precedent, which is different from civil law overseas. The precedent, though, in the case law is often around a statute, but interpreting the statute. But case law isn't allowed to jump around. I like to say it's like Legos, where you can't build higher up unless parts are touching, where you're taking something from an earlier case so that you can keep building and sort of reflecting the problems or implementation with these laws, aside from wholesale unconstitutional. And I will say that there's a point in time, if you're focused on public service, where you stand back like an artist does from their work and squints at it, and you say, now, does this make sense? How is this going to look to the public? Have we said this in such a way that it's going to make sense to them, or are we being so pedantic about this that it's a nonsensical result? And that's where the discretion for the judiciary comes in. And the court has the discretion, just because sometimes, there's more than one way to climb a mountain, and there's more than one way to analyze a problem in law. And once in a while, there is a case that is actually what we call an equipoise, meaning it could really go either way because the law could support either direction. And that's where your discretion comes in. But when the discretion should be focused on the work of the legal profession, which is helping people and making sure that this works for people. not on some moral judgment of the law, which the moral judgment, again, belongs to the legislature. So I hope not.
All right, thank you very much, Justice Brunner. Our next question is from Karen. Karen, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you. Justice Brunner, this just occurred to me as you were speaking. We think of the American or the national, the federal Constitution as sort of a given. It doesn't change easily. You change it at your peril. You amend it with great struggle and sometimes, 50 years. How hard is it to change the Ohio Constitution? Because you as a Supreme Court, you're looking at the extent to which any given action or law meets the requirements of the Ohio Constitution. How easy would it be for a Republican legislature, for instance, to change wholesale laws in the Ohio Constitution? Is it possible? And should we be afraid of that?
There's two ways to change the Constitution, and that's essentially the popular vote. And that is if you look at the state constitution as the voice of the people of Ohio, then initiative, referendum, and initiated legislation are three forms of powers reserved to the people. Now, unfortunately, the state constitution gives the legislature the authority to create procedures on how to do that. So what I've observed over my years is that the more people are dissatisfied with what the legislature does, the more they move forward with an initiative. And then afterward, the legislature makes the procedures tighter and tighter and more difficult and more difficult. Now, the second method is the legislature can adopt a joint resolution to amend the Constitution by, I believe it's 2/3 or 3/4 vote. I'm sorry, I don't have it at the top of my head, but it's by a super majority. And then they'll submit that to the people to vote on. Two of the things that they're doing this fall, and they're very political in nature. One I touched on a little bit earlier, which is bail reform, and saying that taking away from the Ohio Supreme Court the authority to draft rules that deal with bail, and this is completely in the criminal justice system, and saying that safety must be a consideration when determining bail. So that will mean that the media may actually control indirectly how much bail a person has to pay, who's most likely to be poor, in order to get out of jail pending trial. And again, our system is you're presumed innocent unless and until proved guilty. So so the second issue that'll be on the ballot will be that you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. And these are total red herrings and scare tactics, and they're being done for political purposes in order to try to make sure they bring out their voters. I think they're nervous. So it's easier than it would be for the U.S. And the last thing I'll point out on gerrymandering, with our very first decision on the state legislative districts, Chief Justice O'Connor said, folks, you need to do a new amendment. You need to do an amendment that's a nonpartisan redistricting commission. Take a look at Michigan, take a look at California. And I concurred with her on that opinion.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Justice Brunner. I am incredibly impressed by your sincerity and your knowledge and all the things that you've done. And I'm also really shocked at the level of corruption that's taken place in Ohio over the past few years. But thank you so much for joining us today. And yes, we will hopefully we will do everything we can to get people to vote for you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Just make sure everybody votes.
Yeah, that's what we want to do. We need good, qualified people such as yourself in our government making decisions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next.
All right, that would be me. So can everyone hear me? I think yes, I've unmuted
we
myself.
can hear you.
All right, good. So this year is the first time that we'll be voting for the Supreme Court nominees with partisan tags. That means that they have a D or an R after their names. And it's also the first time that I think that most of us have heard about what's happening at the Supreme Court every day or two, because there's been a lot that's been going on with the Supreme Court. This year's the main thing is with the redistricting, which we had mentioned before. So I'd like to introduce our next two speakers, who are Judge Terri Jamison and Judge Marilyn Zayas. Judge Terri Jamison has operated her own business in Columbus for the last 16 years, well, for 16 years before she pursued her law degree. She has served as a lawyer and more recently as a judge in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, Domestic Relations Division, and the Juvenile Branch. She is running against Pat Fischer. And the other candidate that we have today is Judge Marilyn Zayas, who is a graduate and adjunct professor of the University of Cincinnati College of Law. And in 2016, she was elected as the first ever Latina judge in Ohio to the First District Court of Appeals. And she is running against the son of our present governor, Pat DeWine. So let's start with Judge Jamison. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Thank you, first of all, excuse me, for the opportunity to be here and meet with you. I am currently a judge on the 10th District Court of Appeals, was elected to that seat in 2020 and have been sitting there now for 1 year. July the 1st was my 1-year anniversary on the court. I'm running for the Supreme Court because I believe that equal justice under the law should be available to all Ohioans. And in the months and years to come, we're going to see a variety of different cases coming before the Ohio Supreme Court. We're going to see cases about the environment, healthcare, just so many different things that we know, civil rights, human rights, public safety policies, voting rights that will be coming in. I think I'm uniquely qualified to sit in those cases. A little bit more about my background. I'm a third-generation coal miner from Welch, West Virginia. So I was a member of a union, the United Mine Workers of America, when I was there. Because of a reduction in the labor force, I moved to Ohio in the mid-1980s and had to reinvent myself from a blue-collar worker into a white-collar worker, as Columbus is more of a service-related industry town. I have owned and operated my own business, as you said, for 16 years. And I also had a law firm for 8 years prior to being elected to the Court of Common Pleas in the Domestic Relations and Juvenile Court, where I served for 8.5 years. While I was there, I started a program called Compass for men and women that owed child support but were unemployed, to make sure that they could obtain their GEDs, obtain literacy skills, help them to reinstate driver's license, and other certifications that might assist them in becoming employed, so that we were not incarcerating men and women because they were poor and unemployed. That program is still running, and we did receive an award from the National Association of Counties in 2017 for that program. So another judge is presiding over that program at this time. I'm sitting on the 10th District Court of Appeals, which is the only district in Ohio that hears appeals from the Ohio Court of Claims and Bureau of Workers' Compensation mandamus actions, which is an action to have a governmental agency perform an act or desist from an act. You can file a writ of prohibition. On this court, we hear appeals from all different administrative agencies. We hear appeals from all the lower trial courts. And it's a privilege to sit on that court at this time. But I do believe that the Supreme Court is in need of independent-minded individuals to make sure that we are a check and balance on legislature and not following the laws that they create, but actually performing our job, which is to interpret the law and to make sure that it is applied equally to everyone and that no one is treated differently than the other and that they have a voice and that voice is heard when they come to the court.
Thank you very much, Judge Jamison. And we will now hear a little bit, I will introduce Judge Zayas, and then we will open up the floor for questions and answers. So Judge Marilyn Zayas is a graduate and adjunct professor of the University of Cincinnati, as I said before. And I would ask you if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your motivation to run Judge Zayas.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to connect with all of you from abroad. So I'm Judge Marilyn Zayas, and I am simply running because whenever anyone comes to a court in Ohio, and certainly for the highest court of our state, they shouldn't believe, they should know that they have a fair chance. We need to take politics out of the Ohio Supreme Court. I currently serve on the 1st Appellate District, which is located in Cincinnati, Hamilton County. It's one of the 12 courts of appeals in Ohio. This is my 6th year at this appellate district. And in the time that I have served, I've had the honor to decide over 1,000 cases throughout the state of Ohio. So in addition to my own appellate district, I've also served on 4 other appellate districts by special appointment of the Chief Justice. And I've also had the opportunity to try out the digs at the Ohio Supreme Court as I came to serve over a case for recused justice, also on special assignment of the Chief Justice. I came to Ohio by way of New York City. So I was born in Spanish Harlem, grew up most of my adolescence in Washington Heights. And I was able to experience a neighborhood transition from a working class neighborhood to a neighborhood that was devastated by the heroin epidemic of the 70s. I also grew up in a time in which there was a lot of discrimination against people of Puerto Rican descent in the 70s. And I'm going to tell you what that really taught me is that I'm not more than, I'm not less than, everyone's equal. And that developed the core of my judicial philosophy. So my judicial philosophy is quite simple. The law is the great equalizer. You simply follow the law. Cases should be ruled on the law, the Constitution, and the facts of the case. It's just that simple. I am in this race, as you already know, I'm running against the governor's son. And, you know, this is a race that it's not going to be an easy race, but it's an absolutely necessary race. The way that I came into this initially was because of the decision that my opponent did when he first joined the court, when he first joined the Supreme Court in January of 2017. So I joined the Court of Appeals in December of 16. He joined the Supreme Court the following month. And there were a couple cases that had been decided by the Ohio Supreme Court in December of 16. There was a request for those cases to be reconsidered. Well, reconsideration is something when there was just such a dire mistake, such a misunderstanding of the facts. Less than 1% of cases get reconsidered. Well, my opponent chose to treat this as an opportunity to do a do-over on these cases. Can you imagine? And I think that, and I shared this with you because what we're seeing is issues such as this where politics are making the decisions on how the judiciary is making its decisions. And so here we have a Chief Justice who has been the swing vote on several key decisions, So depending on what happens with this election, are we looking at more of the same, of cases being treated as if this is a fresh opportunity because we have a different person who is manning the helm, and because we now have certain votes and are able to do things that we're not able to do as a minority, as a voice in the minority. When that happened, that was the catalyst for me to say, God, if I ever have the opportunity, I will run for the Ohio Supreme Court, because politics has no place in this court. I am running because ethics is another issue. We are losing trust in our courts. The public cannot lose trust of our Supreme Court. So we need a court that ethics is part of the job every day. Politics has no place. And it's real simple. When you follow the law, you're going to be faithful to the law, and then you're going to be faithful to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Zayas. We wish you the best of luck, and I know we're all going to vote for you, and we'll do everything we can to get you elected. While we're going to take questions from the two judges and the justice. If anyone has a question, please type in the chat, star hand up, and then we'll take you in order of received. But my first question, and I guess anyone can answer this question, is could you please share your thoughts on what issues you anticipate will come to the court and this in the coming year or so, and where you would stand on those issues? We can start with you, Judge Zayas.
Well, it's hard to anticipate the issues. I think the concerns that we have is because of the Dobbs case, whether we will see a further shrinking of we the people from the US Constitution, and that civil liberties will now be given to the states to regulate. If that is the future that we are going to be seeing in our states, then as the legislature starts to put together such legislation, any constitutional challenges on those legislative pieces will come to the Ohio Supreme Court. Some of the things that I hope that we will be seeing at the Supreme Court will be a change in policies. So this election will have an impact on two things. One is what we call the decision on the merits, the decision of the cases, but also it will be decisions, and this is something that Justice Brunner spoke about earlier, it's also setting the direction for the courts, and the 7 justices that sit in those 7 seats will have at hand, because you need at least 4 justices to be in agreement in order to move forward any policies. So if we're talking about things like the expansion of, any sort of special service courts, or creation of any new policies and procedures, if we're talking about any policies that we would want to be passed on the determination of when a person is able to be released while they're pending, while a case is pending, or when they might pose a risk to the society and shouldn't be released. There's so many things that policies that are determined when we're talking about ethical issues. So one of the things that the Supreme Court has governance over are the judicial canons and the rules that govern the ethics of all of the judges. The one thing that unfortunately the justices don't have control over is the ethics of their fellow justices. And ironically, when I was in a candidates forum, this question was posed with regard to my opponent, and the answer that came from another candidate was, well, that's when you vote them out. That seems to be, unfortunately, the only option we have, but this is the year. So it's hard to say what are the cases that will come before us. I think the part that is also very important and germane is what are the policy directions that the Supreme Court can take.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to care to answer that question? You don't have to. We do have other questions. Okay, So our next question will come from Nikki. Go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. It's been really great getting to hear from each of you how you would like to fill the role of Justice of the Supreme Court. But my question's a little bit for those of us living overseas. What we can do is we can do phone banking to call our members and also to hopefully, call campaigns in Ohio as well. But we all know that down ticket voting in Ohio seems to be kind of tricky. And it's great that finally there's going to be a D next to your name on the ballot, which should hopefully help. But do you have some other advice for us or some things that you're seeing that have worked with voters back home for getting your names out there that maybe we can also apply to our Democrats Abroad members to help make sure we're turning out the vote for each of you? And if David Pepper's on the call and wants to jump in on this too, I know that he's also been doing some work with down ballot.
I can start. I think folks need to know the mechanics of overseas voting because you basically that's the basic thing that needs to be done. There's information about voting on my website. There's also quite a bit of information on the Secretary of State's website, and I think there's a nice voter toolkit. And sometimes I think the organization on that website's a little bit, different. I don't think it's intentionally so, but I think making sure people understand the deadlines, the mechanics, and there is a universal absentee ballot as well. But I think if you can, for voters from Ohio, focus on making sure that they start now actually. Making sure that they'll receive an absentee ballot. And then you can do the voter education. You could just put together a one pager, or where they at least would have access to the websites of all the candidates so that they can do their own investigation.
And I think just stressing the importance of not skipping candidates. Even if you have to pull your cell phone out at the voting booth and look them up, it's just important not to skip candidates. We have in the past seen a fall off on the judicial races. And I would say to anyone that skips a judicial race that you're more likely to come in contact with a judicial candidate than any other branch of government. Whether it's a speeding ticket, a divorce, child custody, child support, eviction, foreclosure, all of those things you do before a judge. And it's too late to find out what their philosophy is when you're standing in front of them.
What seems to be really growing, especially post-pandemic, is the use of electronic forms of communication. And I would assume that, abroad, that's going to be your most effective tool to connect with people, is to use those mediums and those medias to be able to get information to folks. And one of the things that I don't think that we have emphasized in this conversation is that we have a very unique opportunity in the state of Ohio to be able to really bring balance by having a Supreme Court that is a majority of Democrats. I think it's been decades since we have had this opportunity. And as you know, there's been a one-party stronghold over the three branches of the government now for quite a sustained time. So having that balance is going to be very important, and to have a Supreme Court that's poised to be the buck stops here court for the legislature and for the executive.
And Nikki, if I could just jump in, we had this long run of losing these races for years, and it was generally driven by, going back to what Judge Jamison talked about, our voters would just stop voting. And the reason that we had the reason we have three Democratic endorsed candidates now is because in about 2016, we decided to do something about the undervoting problem, and we would emphasize voting through. We would feature judges at dinner programs like you are doing today, This can't be viewed as some kind of side race. And as I said, I don't think there are any more important races in the ballot in Ohio this year than these three, if you care about democracy and fundamental rights. And the good news is so on the state side, we made sure that every single poll had someone passing out a sample ballot with judges, because in the past that would be left out. And we were able to show that really hard work reduced the drop off significantly. In fact, we had lower drop off than the Republicans in both 18 and 20 to judges, which we hadn't had for decades. And all of a sudden we go from losing, we won 3 out of 4. Justice Brunner, for those of you who don't know, the single biggest overperformance in the nation in a state that Trump won was Justice Brunner winning by 10 when Trump won Ohio by 8. That's because she's so well known, and we were very lucky to have someone with her long record. It's also because our voters were paying more attention to judicial races than Donald Trump's voters, who had no idea who was running, because the Republican Party did not do as much as we did. So to answer your question, Nikki, the simple mechanism, as Justice Brunner said, 1, let's get all those Democrats abroad voting. But number 2, and it's easier now because the D will be next to their name, but make sure that they understand the truth, which is that these races, as Judge Jamison said, and it's not just about the individual case, but our state's future, I think, is more tied up in the results of these 3 races than almost any other race on the ballot. And if we can continue to see our undervote lower than theirs, even if we don't win every race we want to win, as Justice Brunner showed in 20, you can lose some and still win these. And winning these 3, I mean, I want to win everything on the ballot, but you win these 3, Ohio, and we're all celebrating, because it is a generation of difference whether these 3 win versus Kennedy and the 2 opponents. My only question, I'll just throw it out there, you can answer over time, like, just to go back to Judges Zayas' horrific opponent, could I just ask for the record, if each of you had a father or husband or brother who was a defendant in a case before you, would you recuse in that case or not?
I would recuse. I actually had a case where my first cousin was in the courtroom. He was the plaintiff in a case. And I heard the name Jamison, but I was just writing when they called the case. And I happened to look up. And so I asked the attorney, I said, did it ever cross your mind that he might be related to me? And she said, well, it did cross my mind, but I didn't think it would be related. So I had to recuse. I did recuse because there's no way that the defendant in the case could not perceive that there was a bias if I'm ruling on a case where my cousin is the plaintiff. And I think that we need to make sure that people understand the canons require it. And you should have a sense of fairness. That's what you have as a judge. You are the one that is the arbiter of the facts, and you should have a sense of objectivity. And you cannot show a sense of objectivity when you're ruling on cases that involve your own relatives.
Absolutely.
Well, and especially if your father's also the grantor of your trust, the trustee and the grantor of your trust. So there's not just the familial, there's the huge financial connection when your net worth is reported to be 31 million.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a pattern, unfortunately, because not only was there a failure to recuse on the redistricting cases, despite the fact that father was part of the commission, but also with regard to the case on whether what training would be required, if any, from teachers that want to bring firearms into schools. Father DeWine had an opinion letter in his role as the Attorney General, and his son not only failed to recuse, but then decided it exactly as father's opinion letter had stated.
Yeah, no, it's I ask it, it's nuts. I mean, to me, and you guys can't probably say, it's like, I've never seen anything more unethical than what Pat DeWine's been doing. And he keeps, and it really does. And just, for Justice Kennedy and Justice Fischer, who are not Pat DeWine, I think the first opinion they joined in an unsigned opinion with Pat DeWine. So they're tied to the hip with this very questionable, unethical justice. They didn't separate and write a separate dissent because they disassociate from this unethical act. They signed it and covered for it by having this unprecedented dissent that no one would claim. So I think everyone that you guys are running against is sort of, you have to worry for all of them that they're going along with this very unethical act in at least one dissent, didn't separate, but actually signed on to an opinion that I'm assuming he had a lot to do with because they wouldn't admit who wrote it. It's really a startling, going back to the rule of law. This is one other undermining the rule of law. You can't, you're seeing these massive opinions with huge importance coming out of someone who has this egregious conflict. So again, I'm glad you all three said that. And as I think Terry said, I think any judge in the state of Ohio, any single judge in the state would say the same thing, except for one, Justice DeWine, and his two colleagues, apparently.
I have a couple of other questions. Art, you're next.
Hi, thanks for that discussion. For those who weren't clear, there was a redistricting case in which the governor was a party, and his son, Justice DeWine, did not recuse himself, just so everyone understands. It all sounds like something that would happen in Serbia, Judge Brunner, and still, unfortunately. Anyway, I want to thank you all again for participating in this. This is great. I think at Democrats Abroad, we have made a particular emphasis this year on encouraging our voters, more than encouraging, but to vote beyond the federal elections, to vote what we call down ballot races or whatever you want to call them at state and local elections, particularly in Ohio, where voters are allowed to do, for overseas voters are allowed to do this. I would also mention in terms of the information, we have a website, I forget if somebody mentioned already, called votefromabroad.org, which has a lot of this information about how to vote from abroad. It helps people fill out the form that they need to send in. Ohio voters can send in their ballot request by email if they want, and they can get their ballot back by email. Unfortunately, they have to send the ballot in by postal mail, if I read it correctly. My Ohio team can correct me if I've got that wrong. So it's very important for voters when they get their ballot back by email, 45 days before the election, which is federal law, they need to send it in right away, even though there is a 10-day extension for voters past election day to receive the ballot, but they still need to get it in the mail as soon as possible, especially because there are lots of problems with international mail. Anyway, the question I wanted to ask, going back to the US Supreme Court and their decisions, they have said that, and voting rights and all that, they have said that they will take up this case, I forget what it's called, Shamot or something, next term, which puts out this independent legislature theory that basically says that the legislature is basically the only ones who are involved in determining how elections are run. God forbid they rule that way, but I'm just wondering you guys are experts on this, if that happens, is there any way that the state Supreme Courts can overturn that, turn it around, something like, is there any way to get around that if the Supreme Court rules that way? Because that would really be, as David said, a total threat to our democracy, given what we've seen the Republican legislatures do in states around the country. Thanks.
So thank you. So that theory applies to the congressional redistricting. When Ohio passed its two constitutional amendments, the first one was for state legislative redistricting. The second was for congressional. Typically in Ohio, before that, the purview for redistricting was under the state legislature. A very political process, and they decided it, then it would be litigated in federal court after that. The question that then came the Rucho decision, I believe it was 2019, saying that these questions of gerrymandering are not addressed by the US Constitution and it belongs in the state, for the state courts to decide. One of the attorneys for the Redistricting Commission, or some of the individual members of the Redistricting Commission from North Carolina, seems to be a pretty predominant in this field of litigation. And we noticed in North Carolina, my staff and I noticed that he had been using this independent state legislature theory. And as I saw it, it was probably only a matter of time before they got this to the court. And we knew that some of the members of the court had signaled some interest in this issue. So it should not have, that I can see, any appreciable effect on the jurisdiction of the state Supreme Courts, depending on what the US Supreme Court says. They'd have to kind of do a reversal on what they said in Rucho, but it seems to be more focused on the congressional. What that does to democracy at the US level only remains to be seen.
Thank you. Anyway, it's all pretty scary.
Yeah, I'll just say in Rucho, Roberts, because I've been tweeting about this, in Rucho, and again, these guys clearly reverse precedent more often than we'd like, as we're learning, but in Rucho, they did say, this was only 3 years ago, that they couldn't touch gerrymandering as a federal court, but they said, if it's a matter of state law, it should be up to state courts. And Roberts wrote that, and all the conservatives signed it. Now, I think some of those conservatives will flip on a dime, but they did write that only 3 years ago. And so as Justice Brunner said, you know, if even two of them stick to what they said 3 years ago, they should not be embracing fully this theory, because it would be undermining something they just wrote. That's my own, again, I'm not an optimist on a lot of these things, but that's at least something. If you read this Rucho opinion out of Wisconsin, it does give some hope that they were respecting state courts when it came to at least state level constitutional law.
Right. Our next question is from Bill Zapp. Bill, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, can anybody talk about the recently filed case in the Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court, that claims that the Ohio Constitution protects the right to abortion?
The only thing I can say, because it's still pending, is there was a stay that was requested, and the court unanimously denied it without explanation. And again, the case is still pending. And that's probably as much as I can say.
Other states do protect the right of abortion through their, like Florida, through their constitution. Is that what they're talking about in this instance, in this case?
No, and there's always a question of what a court's jurisdiction is. And the Ohio Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, meaning you file it in the first place in the Ohio Supreme Court for very particularized causes of action. So mandamus, requiring a government entity to do what it's required under law by statute to do, and the person who's bringing it is entitled to have that done, as is entitled to the right to receive that relief. Same with, there's another one called Prohibition, that perhaps a judge is overstepping, or a judicial body's overstepping what their authority is. Declaratory judgments, meaning declare the rights of the party or look at the constitutionality of something, generally are brought in a trial court and then heard through the appeals process the rest of the way up. I've heard that there is a move to try to begin the petition process that I discussed earlier, using the state constitution process to actually amend the Constitution to create that particular right. I don't know what the status of that is.
And the only thing I would add to that is, because I had my team look into it, the Ohio Supreme Court has not spoken as of yet with regard to whether any of the current sections of the Ohio Constitution give any sort of protection to access to abortion. But one of the appellate districts has, and they read the article, what was it, Section 1, Article 1 of the Ohio Constitution to be the equivalent, sort of like given
the same as the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment, and given it, and they actually read it to be, I think, higher protection through the Ohio Constitution. But the jury is still out on that from a statewide perspective.
And actually, Marilyn, I have heard, Judge Zayas, I'm sorry, I have heard your opponent state before the Federalist Society that Ohio's Equal Protection Clause actually provides more, it's more expansive than the US Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah. And that's what the appellate.
So I think he would agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he would agree with you.
Exactly. That's good. Well, we have some, I'm sure we have other areas that we might be able to agree on. But that's a good one to be able to agree on.
Thank you so much, Judge Zayas, Justice Brunner, and Judge Jamison. We're going to do everything we can to get you elected because you are three competent, honest, and awesome women. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Yes, you do the same. All right, Karen, do you want to?
Last but not least, for a short presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Elaine Flowers. He's the Deputy Organizing Director for the Ohio Democratic Party, and he has been, I would say, a part of our team, an adjunct part of our team, a huge help to us in organizing this and the previous event and upcoming events, everything that's connected to the Buckeye State. Elaine, do you want to say a few words to us about what's going on at the party?
Yes, definitely. Hello, everybody. Please just try to bear with me. I've been a little under the weather the last couple of days, so if you hear any coughs or sniffles, that's why. But good afternoon. My name is Elaine Flowers. I'm the Deputy Organizing Director for the Ohio Coordinated Campaign. I really appreciate you having me on today. I just wanted to give like a few brief updates about what we've been doing and then what we're doing right now. I'm really proud of this campaign because it's the earliest coordinated campaign in Ohio since Obama in 2012. We've hired 13 regional directors. We've hired 30 field organizers, a lot more field organizers to come. They're all across the state right now in their own regions and their own turfs. They've been building relationships in their communities. They've been having organizing meetings in their communities. They've been holding high traffic canvas events in their communities to register voters in key areas where we need to register voters. We've also been trying to build out our distributive program, which is, well, distributed is just a fancy way of saying remote organizing or virtual organizing or organizing from your own home. So it's where all of our calls live. So we don't really have any organizers doing phone banks. We have all volunteer-led phone banks, which are all virtual, which have been very, very great, very successful so far. We've been able to recruit 200 volunteers to join our distributive program. And those 200 volunteers just since April, since we've launched, have made 20,000 phone calls. They've recruited 600 volunteers to help us win in November. And we're only expanding, we're only growing. We have phone bank trainings on Wednesdays from 5:30 to 8, Thursdays from 5:30 to 8, and Saturdays from 1 to 3:30. We plan on expanding the trainings to every day at some point. So hopefully it'll give more people the opportunity to join us. But that's pretty much the big things that the distributor program is working on right now. Later this month, we'll start doing texting as well. And we'll start doing our relational program with our app Impactive, which is just a way for folks to get their family and friends involved in this political process. That's pretty much all the updates that I had. I was going to drop the link. So we have a coordinated link that'll take you to all of our shifts, everything that we have going on for the ODP. Even if you can't get involved, can't do a shift personally yourself, it would really help if you could share it with your networks, share it with your family, with your friends. It'd be very, very helpful. So I can also take questions if anybody has any questions for me.
If you have a question for Elaine, just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. We're going to only give it a couple minutes, so jump on in there and unmute if you have a question. I have a question really quick. Is that the best way to get involved, is to just use that phone banking training link that we got from you? Oh, you put another one in there. No, it's the same one. Yeah, and just because I have a lot of nieces and nephews in Ohio that I would like to get them involved. So
Honestly, that's one of the best ways to get involved if you're looking to organize remotely, organize from your home. But if you have nieces and nephews that are willing to do in-person work, we have organizers and regional directors in every part of the state that are holding organizing meetings. We're going to be door knocking very soon in the states. We have high traffic canvas events where we register voters in key areas. If you do have somebody that wants to get involved in that way, I put my email right there as well. So if you just give me their contact information, I can get transfer them over to the regional director in that area, and then they can reach out to them and show them the in-person volunteer opportunities that we have. But we have a lot of virtual stuff going on too.
okay, super, thank you. All right, Aleem, looks like you were pretty clear, and no, we don't have any questions.
I'll just say I'm glad to hear. I spent the election week, the week before the election in 2008, going door to door in, yes, of course, Akron with my 84-year-old mother. So I may choose Akron again to go door to door.
Yes. Yes, sir. Akron's a very important place.
Doing person-to-person stuff. That's great.
Yes, sir. We have a great regional in Akron. His name is Will Hayden, and we just hired some amazing organizers for the area too. So lots going on. Definitely. That's a very important area.
All right, Nikki, if you want to land the
Oh,
plane.
and thank you, Judge. I just saw your message.
This has been the fastest 90 minutes that I've had in a long time. There's been so much information, so many great candidates and people. Take it away, Nikki.
First and foremost, thank you very much, Justice Brunner. Thank you very much, Judge Zayas, Judge Jamison, David Pepper, who's already jumped off, and Elaine Flowers for being here on behalf of ODP. It's sometimes very difficult living abroad and watching what's going on back home and wanting to be a part of it and wanting to feel like our voices matter too, even though we're not living in the great state of Ohio. So it's very, very deeply appreciated that you would take time out of your busy schedules to spend with us and to enlighten us about who you are as a candidate and give us the opportunity to ask questions and let us help you get you guys all elected, because that is our main focus here today. So thank you. Again, as always, we ask if you have not registered to vote or requested your ballot, please do that as soon as possible. Votefromabroad.org will give you all of the information. We also have help desks available if you have questions. No question is too big or too small, and we will have someone get back to you that will be able to help walk you through the process and hopefully answer all of your questions. We do also have to ask, of course, this is a volunteer organization, and the campaigns are also running with donations. And so we know you're getting a lot of emails right now, so we don't want to make this too complicated. If you can, donate. There's Democrats Abroad. We'll post the link. Of course, all of the candidates running in Ohio would also, I don't think anybody would turn away a donation, but do keep in mind that you do have to be a US citizen in order to make a donation. So do just want to clarify that for those of you donating to the campaigns or to Democrats Abroad. And also, if you can't donate, or if you can donate and you have some time, please volunteer. All of us have been there before. We know that presidential election year tends to be a little sexier, a little bit more fun, gets on the news a little bit more, but that does not make this year any less important. And in fact, it's probably even more important. We have been watching what the Republicans have decided to do to the United States of America and to our home state of Ohio, and getting out and making some phone calls and helping us connect with other Democrats Abroad members, helping to phone bank through ODP or one of the candidates to help them drive out the vote back home. Sharing these videos. We will actually have this recording on our YouTube channel so that you can watch it again if you'd like to, or if you want to share it with your friends and family members who couldn't be here today. This is a great way for them to, if they can't make the live event, to still see who they're going to be voting for in November. And this is another important point for the justices. They are all running for the Supreme Court of Ohio, which means each one, Judge Jamison, Judge Zayas, and Justice Brunner, will be on your ballot regardless of where you live in Ohio. It is extremely important that you are voting all the way down to the bottom. Check the back page. There's a lot of times there is a back page. There might be 3 pages, but make sure you check every single page and every single D before you drop your ballot back in the mail. And again, circling back, please make sure that you are volunteering. Share these articles, help us make some phone calls, send us information that might be helpful for us to send out to our members. I think it was a great idea of the discussion earlier about having a sample ballot with pictures and names so we know who we're voting for. So that's something that came out of this discussion that hopefully we can develop going on down the road. But again, votefromabroad.org, donate your time. We can use it, trust us. And please make sure that you are requesting your ballot at votefromabroad.org. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care.
Thank you.